Hello, good morning and welcome. It's Wednesday, December the 17th, and government wants to surprise us with the tempo of activity in the last 24 hours before Parliament breaks up for Christmas. I'm Anne McElvoy from Politico.
And aren't we here for that? I'm Sam Coates of Sky News. There are just a paltry 14 ministerial statements today to keep everyone on their toes, including something to do with a machinery of government change from the Prime Minister. So we'll find out more about that later. In just a few moments, we'll get an update on the race for who's going to be the next US ambassador. And at 9:30 this morning, big deal. Claxons, government are going to announce a significant next stage of their reset with the European Union, rejoining the Erasmus exchange programme from 2027.
Britons will be able to spend a year studying at European universities as part of their UK degree courses without paying extra fees, vice versa for European students. That's been a big ask on the EU side. Arguably, Sam, this is the first tangible outcome of all of those talks about reconnection that we've been covering on this podcast. Everything so far has been an aspiration, or in some cases, a bit stuck, but we'll have more on that detail in a moment.
But let's start just with a bit of housekeeping. Tomorrow is the final episode of our daily series. Parliament is off, so are we. We'll have a special 2026 preview out soon and on your TV screens. But after tomorrow, the 5 a.m. alarm is being turned off until the first Monday in January. Will you miss me? You don't have to answer that out loud, Anne.
It was a silence, but it was a loving silence.
Just as well. Secondly, there's some, we saw good news. It's great news, right? Our producer, Evan, who makes all of this podcast actually happen, has been looking at the various counters. And since we returned at the start of September, we have had 1.1 million listens to this podcast. That's a kind of unbelievably large number. We've got an incredibly loyal audience who've stuck with us through all of the drama. The Starmer drama of early autumn. All of you stayed and listened to the special episode on Ed Davey's conference speech. I checked the numbers. You really did. Through to the coverage of the most dramatic budget of modern times, which we went pretty heavy on. You've all been there every step of the way, and 1.1 million since the start of September is pretty damn excellent. So thank you for being part of our early morning club. It does make the alarm going off at 5 a.m. just that little bit easier to know that you're there too.
It certainly does. I think we're both thrilled to have joined the Million High Club. And in and around politics, so many listeners.
Keep going. I understand now.
I'll keep up, Sam. Is that bit going to get cut?
No.
We're really thrilled to have so many of you in and around politics alongside us, and also coming up to us in this season of warm white wine to say hello. Sam, I went off to drinks to celebrate some arrivals and departures in the security services last night. Very pleased to hear we have such top-notch listeners from people with eyes and ears at home and abroad as well. So if you do follow us, please do recommend us to your friends for their New Year habits.
And it is a bit of an interactive podcast in the sense that you sort of, we all know each other. So if you have something that we should be covering, please just message us. You've probably got our numbers. And we want to hear from you about what we should be covering. A whole load of people in the business community see things like bills and legislation totally differently to the rest of us. A whole lot of people in the charity sector also will be able to spot stuff that the government isn't telling us. So tell us that. Right. Big news, potentially. You have some insight on where we are, the very latest on the race to be our person in Washington. Permanent replacement for Peter Mandelson, Lord Mandelson. People don't go around government calling it the job to replace Peter Mandelson, funnily enough. There is a pro tem standard at the moment. That's James Roscoe. He's been doing the job through the state visit since early September. Anyway, Anne, hit me with what you think is going on.
Well, they are rounding the bend into the final furlong in the Whitehall's Got Talent race to get us an actual ambassador into DC. James Roscoe's been doing a sterling job in between. He's the deputy ambassador and has been acting there, but it is getting towards a time when we need the full appointment. I'm hearing that the number 10 business advisor, Varun Chandra, is closing in on the role. He's now very much seen, Sam, as the man to beat. Britain's envoy to Moscow, Nigel Casey, appears to have edged out Christian Turner in the internal preference and the Foreign Office rankings, because the way this works is that the FCDO basically presents its list on a ranking. The Prime Minister could, of course, say, well, actually, I prefer someone from lower down the ranking, or have their own preference. And that's where you end up with Varun Chandra versus, at the moment, it would appear, Nigel Casey, but with the edge going to Varun.
It's not over the line till it's over the line, of course, but that is fascinating. You've been putting us all to shame, and by doing so much hard work this close to Christmas. So this morning I put on my own hard yards just to, if Varun Chandra is like the man to beat, right, we're all going to need to know a lot more about him, in so much as it is possible to know about a guy who spent most of his life in the private sector and in a not particularly open bit of the private sector. So let me tell you what we know about him. His previous job before joining Number 10 was for Hacklet, which some people describe as a sort of management consultancy for spooks, where he was one of the founding partners and managing partner and chairman. So he basically ran that organisation. Incidentally, while he was there, he employed one Ollie Robbins, who is now the head civil servant at the Foreign Office and has been pretty central in the role of finding a new replacement for Peter Mandelson in Washington. Although my sense is having Ollie Robbins run the application process hasn't necessarily been that helpful for Varun Chandra. There's quite a lot of politics around of that. Now, looking back through Varun's career, there are lots of interesting markers. He was actually he was in Lehman Brothers in the early days until 2008, the year that company went down. But he was actually an early figure at Tony Blair Associates in the kind of late 2000s. That's where he went in 2008 for 6 years. So he must have quite a strong affiliation with the former Prime Minister, if he was there in the early days. He's a big philanthropist, long list of charities he's been associated with: Royal Marsden Cancer Charity, British Asian Trust, the Young Vic, MCC, Royal Academy of Arts. All of those are on his LinkedIn CV, which, spoiler alert, I've got some of the stuff from. And he's very personable. Look, he pops up on trips. He was on the trip that I was on to India with big business delegations. So in his role as business advisor to the PM, he was there and he was rattling around the plane and extremely pleasant. And I did talk to the business leaders about him, and they all spoke very highly of him as somebody who gets things done. So I suppose my reflection is, if the appointment to replace Peter Mandelson was so obvious, why is it taken so long? Peter Mandelson was sacked on September the 11th, and here we are on December the 17th. We haven't actually got a decision, even if you have a sense of where the wind might be blowing. What do you think the politics of this race have been?
Well, that background is really telling, and good that you remind us of that. Varun Chandra was also the person who built the business model, helped Tony Blair put the financial model of Tony Blair Associates in place. So that is quite a deep link that he has there. I think the interesting thing as we go into this final crunch before we get the big announcement of the ambassador, Sam, is how it has been framed for and with the Prime Minister. So the reason that he's surging is that trade is still the key challenge. While when it comes to Russia security, the big picture, we had the first speech by Blaise Metroelli, the new head of MI6, this week. The thinking is they're pretty well covered off there on the security services, who have very good channels with the US, notwithstanding all the tensions around the Trump national security document. I'm sure that the links there remain tight. There's a very solid line of communication to Number 10. So if you're someone like Nigel Casey coming from the Moscow ambassador position, you would be very tempting, but there are other ways in which that relationship can be made to work. If you are, for instance, what Christian Turner, I should say, is a representative to the UN, ditto, big in the international picture, real Foreign Office pro. But the trade bit is seen as actually even more knotty because it relies on links to the Trump administration. Chandra has those to and fro to Washington, knows a lot of people around Donald Trump. Look how that technology deal, which was big fanfare, that was agreed to after the state visit. I'm told it's still all fine. It's all still in place. But there's been a bit of leakage of stories from the US side, throwing other little tariff issues in there. And so causing, if you like, a few bumps in the road, and having someone to sort that out, if you like, would allow the Foreign Office, the security people, to do what they do and sort of take trade off their plate.
That's right. People talk about Varun Chandler's MAGA Rolodex, which is clearly important here. I think that there is a danger that if you, or it's a danger that, as expressed to me by people in not involved in the process, but who understand what the job requires and entails, that if you get a sort of slightly drier career diplomat, it's probably all too easy for Donald Trump's White House to ignore you. But if you got somebody a bit splashy, and I think Chandler probably is a bit splashy, then there's much more chance of Britain continuing to sort of keep in there and keep prominent and make sure we keep being noticed by Donald Trump. The cabinet politics of all of this are really interesting as well. I am being told, like you, that we're near a decision. From memory, actually, Peter Mandelson's appointment pretty much came on the last working day before Christmas a year ago. So maybe that's in the advent calendar stored up for even later this week. But just to return us to process, remember how the way that this is meant to work. There's been a formal job application online to advertise for the $174,000 a year role. Candidates provide a CV and a covering letter of up to 2 pages explaining why the appointment interests you and how you can evidence your suitability for the role, which all seems a bit bananas for a job like this, which ultimately is the pick of the PM. But here's the thing. As you say, Anne, the Foreign Secretary has got to give a recommendation to the Prime Minister, who then either appoints or confirms the appointment, right? It's a 2-part job. Now, this is the interesting bit. I was recently told about a bit of recent history about just how opposed David Lammy was to the Peter Mandelson appointment last autumn. You know, the former Foreign Secretary, now Deputy Prime Minister, was making clear to Number 10 he didn't want it to happen. But it appears that Morgan McSweeney, who used to speak to Peter Mandelson pretty much the whole time, won out, and David Lammy, his objections were overridden. Now, if I had to bet, and this is just speculation on me, putting 2 and 2 together, maybe getting 5, I can see a world in which Yvette Cooper isn't going to be so keen on a man in Number 10 who, as far as I see, she doesn't know from her career, and who isn't part of the network that she oversees getting that job. You know, at one stage, somebody suggested to me that the entire job application process that I just made fun of a bit was there to throw a bit of a boulder in the way of Varun's application. But it sounds like he's managed to navigate around that section of it. What do you think?
Yes, you are completely right in saying that the Foreign Office does feel it should very much, have a dog in this fight when it comes to these appointments. And there are certainly people around there in senior positions and ambassadors and former ambassadors saying, you went with someone outside the Foreign Office ranks, not a seasoned diplomat with all of those flying miles behind them. With Peter Mandelson, well, he had the flying miles, but he didn't have the diplomatic kudos behind him, and it went wrong. It broke all the china in Washington when the Epstein files turned out to be very embarrassing. God, Prime Minister, do you really want to do that again? The counterpart I could see, Sam, is that Cooper, for a start, she's also not someone who's been very close to the Foreign Office for years and years. She's really made her career more on the domestic front, although she has had a role previously that involved understanding how the Foreign Office works, but I wouldn't say that she will come into it and say it's just got to be one of ours. Also, if trade is covered off in the way that we described, and let's not forget one reason that you would possibly give Chandra an extra point or two is he's very close to Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary. He knows Susie Wiles, the Chief of Staff to Donald Trump. This not like he doesn't have his own sort of diplomatic network, but that allows Cooper maybe to focus on the bigger international picture. She's been very active, and I think very creditably so, on the Sudan crisis, which has been easy to go past while so much else is going on. She summoned the Chinese ambassador over the conviction of the Hong Kong media tycoon Jimmy Lai this week. So one way and the other, I think as long as she can have her track and make a mark, I don't know if she absolutely cares if it doesn't go to the very good guy from Moscow or the very good guy from the UN. I think she just probably could work with it either way.
That sounds fair enough. Interesting. I didn't know Chandra is close to Susie Wiles, who I have to say is the current Chief of Staff to Donald Trump. But after Susie Wiles gave an interview saying that the president has an alcoholic personality and made other even more disobliging comments about other members of the top Trump team, I don't know that she will be in that job for an awfully long time to come. Right, let's turn to other matters. Just before we get on to the more meaty issue of the Erasmus scheme, which I know all our listeners are hanging on for, which is very, very important, of course. Although, are they really going to be discussing it at the Christmas parties tonight? I hope not. Anyway, I'm going to inject a bit of gutter gossip for you to speed us along our way.
Yay!
It seems that people were quite struck by the polling that we did yesterday, which basically told you how Angela Rayner is at the bottom of the pile in the public's eyes for who they think could do a better job than Keir Starmer. And they don't want her back in cabinet by a massive margin, kind of 2-1 margin. And so guess what? A friend of Angela Rayner's has been in touch, Anne.
Oh, can we get the juicy bit?
Oh, yeah, no, I'm going to tell you. Right. And before I do, can I stress this is actually a friend of hers, and that's not code for a spokesman. It's not code for an aide. It's not code for her. It is just a friend. So this isn't an official view, but it probably does reflect a bit of the thinking somewhere, not a million miles away from people who like Angela Rayner. And this is how they reacted to the poll. They said of the numbers, the point here is that we need to win back Labour voters enough to hold on to power. It's not who polls best across everyone, but who wins Labour voters' hearts. It's the job of the government to increase its popularity. Right, that was point one that they made. So we care about Labour voters and reunited the progressive family seems to be at the heart of the message, which I hear that and quite clearly that sounds like they go on a path that doesn't attempt to make her more attractive to the public at large, which was quite interesting. That was my sort of gut reaction to the first bit of what they said. And then they went on to say, as the only non-government person, Andy Burnham was the most popular in your list. She was Deputy Prime Minister, which is closer to the tough decisions this government's had to take as well. And it's only been 3 months since she resigned due to the stamp duty issue. So the numbers are pretty much expected in the current climate. So that second part of the message is them saying they weren't surprised she came out so badly, but they're suggesting it has as much to do with her proximity to Starmer as the stamp duty issue, which again just gives us a little insight into where an Angela Rayner campaign, if it were to come, might land.
The great Ange divide. That's really fascinating, and you can see the logic of what that friend was telling you there, Sam. But I'd just say, if you put it in the other scale, in the ministerial ranks, the sense that Angela Rayner left quite a clean-up job as Deputy Prime Minister, not least on some of the framings of the commitment on employment rights that she made, some of her promises there to the trade unions, and in some areas going even beyond or appearing to make commitments that even the unions hadn't asked for in such concrete language. And I think there's quite a feeling there that if you're someone, for instance, on Peter Kyle's team, or you're in that sort of neck of the woods, you probably think, well, I'm still like having to go sift this through in order to get to something where I can push the growth agenda. This was absolutely the promise, the first promise that the government made. Apparently, someone said in cabinet this week, if people are talking about us, did we break this or that manifesto commitment that we could maybe get around? But, the one that we did make was that we'd bring back growth. So please, can we get on with it and not put spanners in the works? And I think it's that faction of people in cabinets, and it's not just one person, it's a number of people who will be saying, be very, very careful about the Angela Rayner return and any terms attached to it.
Right. Anne, I keep promising that we're going to talk about Erasmus, but I'm also looking at the clock and there's only 1 minute left. So I'm going to give you a choice. Should we have a worthy discussion about the pros and cons of Erasmus, or should I just tell you one joke that's likely to come up in PMQs? What do you think the listeners really want?
If you can come up with a segue between a return to the Erasmus scheme, which I'll say very quickly is really important for the reconnection, and I think it, in this world of people who worry about students not being able to get to know each other, not being able to travel to and fro, for a certain kind of demographic, this has become an obsessive sort of drinks party topic. So Nick Thomas-Simmons will be pretty keen to have got that over the line, and I think it will get a good his relationship, as we said in Playbook this morning, with Shevkovich. He took him a bottle of whiskey, remember, Sam? Clearly, maybe they had a glass together and got it done. There, we've done it. What's your joke?
Wow. Anne picked Erasmus over the joke. I wasn't predicting that. Anyway, but it was worth the wait. Right. Given it's the last PMQs of the season, there's all sorts of things that MPs could go for, but I wonder whether any of them pick up on a Telegraph story that's worth finishing on. They spotted in the transparency dump last night that the Prime Minister spent £60,000, maybe this isn't a joke at all, £60,130 on a private government jet to watch the Lionesses win the Euros in Zurich in July. The amount of spend that goes on football-related things in government is quite is quite something with Keir Starmer. Now, I read, because nobody would credibly think I knew this myself, that the opponents of high government spending, including the Tories, who were kicking off about this last night, must be hoping that England or Scotland don't make it to the World Cup final this summer, because that's in New Jersey, which really would cost an arm and a leg. Maybe that comes up at PMQs.
Of course, I'm sure that there were very valuable Swiss trade talks taking place on the sidelines.
One of my biggest fails of 2025 rather, was when Keir Starmer came up to me in the Politico pub and started trying to talk to me about an Arsenal game that was on the screen in party conference. I just held my hands up and he just looked witheringly at me and wandered off. Maybe 2026 is the year that I get into football. Right, we've bust our time limit. We have overstayed our welcome. So we will be back for the final Politics of Samaland of 2025 in the Daily Series tomorrow. Can't wait for it.
See you tomorrow for the final.